Okay, so we are now live. Let's just wait a couple of minutes so people can join us. Okay, let's begin now to make sure we don't get late. So, hi everyone, welcome to this call. Here with me is Lola Oyelayo Pearson. She's a digital designer and product strategist with a wealth of experience running in-house and agency design teams. She currently leads a multidisciplinary user experience team at Shopify in Toronto. And she's gonna talk to you about this amazing presentation titled That of a UX Salesman. UX is that, won't leave UX. So welcome, Lola.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Camilla, and hello to World Class Designer Conference. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be here speaking to you all today. So apologies in advance for the clickbait talk title. This is actually a play on the Arthur Miller play, Death of a Salesman. And for those who don't recognize, the image here is Wendell Pierce, a really famous actor. You might know him from The Wire. And he recently played Willie Loman, the lead character in this particular play in the UK last year at the Young Vic Theatre. So what am I going to talk to you about today? Well, let's start with this quote from the play. It says, after all the highways and all the trains and the appointments and the years, you end up being worth more dead than alive. And it sounds a little bit morbid, but in the play, essentially what happens is that Willie Loman is a door-to-door salesman, and this is America in the 50s, and things are changing, and door-to-door salesmen aren't relevant anymore. And the whole play examines like his internal turmoil to figure out what his worth is in the world if he isn't able to earn money the way he knows how to earn money. It does get a bit morbid because he does kill himself at the end of the play in order to get the life insurance money for his wife and his kids. Now, we don't have to worry about suicide for this talk, but I do think there's an interesting theme in here about our life insurance policy for those of us who have been UX people for most of our careers or who are entering the world of user experience and user-centered design, thinking about what it is that's going on in the industry today, because we're about 25 years into, the emergence of this discipline, what's going to happen next, and what I think are the shifts we need to make in our mindset to be even more relevant in our post-UX careers than we are today. So let's get straight into it. This is a really simple kind of distilled view of my life and career. So I won't tell you exactly when, but sometime in the 80s, I was a young person. And I was a resident technology expert in my house. And it was probably then that I started to realize that tech and people didn't really click well, because I, at 3-4 years old was being the person who was brought to work the machine, the video player, the whatever. And even when we got our first computer at home, it was something that my siblings as well, but we would sit there for hours playing all of the games with like Prince of Persia and Lemmings, for those who remember it. This informed some of my choices in education and to focus on interactive systems, which was like an engineering plus cognitive science, plus behavioral science type degree, and then going into business analysis, but again, with this user-centered focus, and then working as a UX practitioner for most of my career. There's a little bit of time in there when I haven't had UX in my job title, but essentially for most of my career, I have been a passionate user-centered designer. It's been part of my brand. It's been part of how I identify. Now, the thing is, around the emergence of my career over the last 20 or so years, there's also been what's happened to the world of tech that we work in. And around about 2013, I found this amazing graphic that explores the explosion of specialism in engineering, right? So if you think right back to 1990s, early 90s, the emergence of the internet, we talked about web and web development, and we talked about webmasters, you know, this one person who did all the writing, all the designs. They built the carousels and did like flashing UIs on all the sites. They were a band of one who did every single job. And we encountered a ton of usability problems with websites, and we also had performance issues. And so the industry got a little bit more mature, it got bigger. And by 2013, we saw a web industry that is essentially this entire image here, with so many different languages, interaction patterns, paradigms, use cases for activities that were on the web. You know, it was much more complex, way more interesting, way more relevant. Fast forward to last year, we're not even really referring to it as the web industry or the web anymore. We are now in tech industry, and it's exploded even beyond this visual. And I think in lots of ways, the engineering landscape has got more nuanced. You know, you have people who understand the difference between back-end, middle, and front-end development. We have native developers for Android and iOS. We have people who specialize in increasingly niche parts of that because there are big, heavy, complex problems. But designers, we seem to be, you know, kind of still navigating this generalist mindset, this idea that we apply ourselves to every type of problem and domain. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not so good. And in many cases, I think it's actually limiting. And I'll walk you through why I think that's limiting. So let me use a fairly common reference that I think a lot of people are using as a, you know, refer to us, which is the things we need to UX. You know, it's become a verb. Let's UX this thing. I want to UX that. Well, the tech we need to UX is not what it was. So when we defined the industry of user experience and the user experience development, it was something quite, you know, general, right? Let's talk about usability, heuristics, let's talk about desktop, and then the emergence of mobile came. And even then it was just these two paradigms. Well, actually, if we look at it now, desktop, web, and mobile are totally shifting paradigms. They don't really mean what they used to mean. You know, you can have an app that has a smartphone, an augmented version, a smart home version, as well as a desktop instance. And all of these things need to speak to each other. So the app has broken out of the device. Everything is on the internet all the time. And the only thing desktop really means is that I view it on an actual desktop-like machine or laptop, but it doesn't actually have any meaning as it relates to the actual utility of the product or service. Similarly, we're in a world where like quant actually equals qual. So we used to have this idea of like data being data and analytics and charts and, you know, things that were going up and numbers being hard, and then qualitative insights being the slow research that UXers did. But actually in the world of machine learning and big data, your quant data is telling you about sentiment and feeling, and it's giving you a sense of the impact, as well as telling you about engagement and the number of interactions something has. So these two things have been brought together. So there's less of like a direct line between the idea of quantitative and qualitative insight as it relates to the tech industry or engagement with digital products. The other thing that I see that's happening is that we're in in between two worlds, right? So we've got ever more future facing, amazing innovations coming through. You know, this year again, we've had blockchain and crypto come back on the scene, and everyone's super excited about machine learning, if not a little bit worried about the implications. We're still talking about AI and robots, you know, self-driving vehicles, things that are maybe emerging a bit slower, but they're very future. At the same time, we're still dealing with legacy tech issues in almost every digital environment that we can imagine. And actually 2020 showed us how big the chasm was between sort of this real-time future and this very, very legacy history. And you know, in my career, there was a time when I was working on a mobile messaging product for a platform that had the majority of its users in South America, so in Brazil, Chile, and Peru. But the people that were using it in South America were messaging their family members in the USA and in Europe. And so we had to somehow make memes, emojis, and real-time sync and delivery happen between 2G and 4G environments. And that's super complicated, but it's the reality of this period of time, probably for the next 5 to 6 years, where there is genuinely a really big and growing divide between legacy infrastructure and the basics that we all need access to, and like some of the future facing technology that is coming next. And the thing is, the implications for us as designers are super interesting, because we're part of, being excited about the future, as well as having to problem solve in real time for the situations that are occurring right now. And there are maybe a few things that I have seen in my career over the last 20 years that make me concerned that as UXers, as designers, and I'll keep repeating this, user-centered practitioners, we're not necessarily prepared for the next, even though we might think we are, right? So there are changes that this is creating in the behavior, not just of end users, but actually in our teams and in our work environment. So I'll walk you through 3 of those things right now. The 3 reasons that I think we need to evolve essentially beyond UX and the framing of UX. I'll keep using the air quotes, just, it helps me. Number 1 is research has changed. So when I started out, research was one of the most important parts of the process. We were talking about needing to understand the end user, needing to really interrogate how they thought, what mental models they brought to a product in order to decide what the product needed to do and how it needed to do it. But as the world gravitated towards agile development and lean development practices and principles, this concept of discovery, where you do deep long form research, people started to give it a bit of a bad rap. It was slow, it took too long, it didn't allow you to get started. And although they've moved away from it now, organizations like Facebook and Amazon really pushed on this idea of move fast, break things, just put something out, even if it's not right, to learn from it. Now, what that has done is it's also challenged our toolkit as UX people. And I don't know that we've necessarily shifted. If anything, I've seen 2 things happen. One, we have emergence of people who don't do any research. So we just go straight into design, and we don't have those inquiry skills that were quite fundamental to the discipline in the early days, or those who are actively resisting the change, and so find themselves in more and more boutique research organizations for a smaller and smaller group of people who really value that long form insight. But it's not as pervasive, it's not as ubiquitous a skill as it used to be in the early days of UX. The other thing that probably annoys quite a few of us is that it's a buzzword. You'll talk about the UX of this, and we need to UX it, and user-centered design. It's like a way for certain people to sound like they're cool, they know what they're talking about. But the reality is, it is a lot of things. And when you are a UXer in an organization, the room needs to be made for you to do your work. A great example, again, from my career in the early years is I was freelancing at an investment bank, and they hired a ton of UX people, but they told us we weren't allowed to have any conversations or share prototypes with our end user, who happened to be traders in the same investment bank, because they were too busy trading. And I was kind of like, well, how do you expect me to do my job? And they're like, you're a UXer, you're an expert in the user, you should just do your job. And it was baffling to me at the time, this idea that you wouldn't allow a user experience or a user-centered person to get to know their user, because my expertise wasn't in investment banking. But for them, they had brought in UX, right? And so this has created a really weird scenario where you've got people who are working in teams and projects that don't understand how they need to work, and we're creating friction with our peers because we're still thinking about things in really narrow defined ways. And so we're not really getting the value out of our skill set, and people aren't necessarily making the most of us being part of the team. The final thing is a critique to the design and the UX industry as I see it today. I do a ton of interviewing. I run a fairly big team at Shopify, and it occurs to me that we don't actually have the right skills for the emergent business and technology context. We definitely know what we're talking about when it comes to mental modeling and some of the behavioral implications of designing for technology. But we seem to have left some fundamentals behind in our toolkit sometimes. So again, moving away from research is a big worrying thing for me. And we also haven't necessarily understood that if we don't understand money, right? If we haven't got a commercial conscience, it doesn't matter how many users we interview. It doesn't matter how good the quality of our conceptual design or our detailed design is. If the money's run out, the money's run out. And not understanding the decisions that go into making the money leaves us in a position of always trying to fight for something without necessarily having the right level of conversation to bring to that table that we're looking for a seat at. So, you know, we have user experience people who are just making it all too easy for themselves to be left out of the conversation because they're not able to bring a level of relevance to the actual problem being discussed. How do I keep going for another year? How do I organize the team? How do I make sure that I'm actually thinking about the small number of engineering resources? How do I prioritize the work? Yes, I understand this is what's super important to the user, but I can't do this and that. So which one do I choose? You know, there are these hard decisions that businesses have to make. And sometimes as UXers, we're not tooled, we're not armed with the tools to enter those scenarios and contribute to those conversations. So we get left out. Now, what does this all mean? Well, I think the thing that we have to consider is that all of the tech that we're working on operates within this realm of the Wicked Digital Quartet. And this is something that I defined a while ago based on the concept of wicked problems. So essentially problems that sometimes it's the root cause, sometimes it's the symptom. They're interrelated issues. They're very hard to solve. So how you solved it in one place isn't necessarily how you would solve it in another. And these issues are often the reasons why we don't get to do the work that we think we're here to do. And when I first codified this, it was a real kind of like exhale moment for me to understand that like 90% of the reasons why I was a frustrated UX person in most of the companies were nothing to do with me or my skills. They were everything to do with the organization of systems and processes and people around the work that I was doing. And so it led me to kind of reframe what my role was. How do I help that situation? How do I be more active? How do I enable progress at the right point? How do I even detect which of these issues is the root cause so that I'm contributing to the right point in that stack? Therefore, I increase the chance that I can actually get to work on the right problem at the end of it. And when you think about it, again, the failures we see in some technologies that are really important to us, you know, we talk about machine learning and the way that's influencing decisions in fundamental ways in almost every society that we all live in. We want to be part of that conversation. We don't want to be at the end where we're just trying to, you know, create a UI or hide certain search results because the machine learning algorithm is racist. We want to be part of the conversation early enough. So we have to have the ability to see into these issues. We have to have the ability to take our humility and bring that to the table and say, hey, I'm here to contribute to the bigger picture, not just to do the UX bit or to UX the solution or to be the person who UX'd that particular product. Like we've got to take ourselves away from the buzzword and deep into the root cause. So with that in mind, what does that actually look like? Well, my number one advice to both new and experienced UX people is think about orienting your career in places where UX is actually not centered, right? This doesn't mean that you're, you know, trying to play a manipulation game, but every time you see UX defined, you have two possible scenarios. One is a highly mature design organization that truly understands the value and is making space for the right type of design work and is allowing designers to contribute to every single stack of the product development lifecycle. Or one where they like the words, they like the titles, they know they need those people. They read the McKinsey article that said design organizations make more money. And so they need those people, but they haven't actually done the work. Those two situations are genuinely what most UX people find themselves facing today. But if you broaden your horizon beyond UX, you may actually find yourself interested in roles that are way more varied and maybe increase the likelihood you'll end up in an organization that is design ready and able to make the right kind of choices while still contributing to solving that problem or shifting the behaviors in that team in the right direction. And so I want to leave you with a couple of directions that I think would be interesting for people's post-UX careers, things that I've been thinking about for myself, ways that I've been advising people that I mentor, and just general conversations that I want to have about what happens when, a UX person is not just the UX person in a team, right? So let's look at that a little bit. So the first two are still in design, but not UX roles as I see them. So the first one is service design. And the thing about service design that has always spoken to me is the fact that it's about people, processes, and technology. It's the intersection of these things that service design looks to map, understand, and then choreograph. It tries to be sensitive to the relationships that have to exist, knowing that nothing is just because an algorithm says it should be. It's related to the people and environment that it's operating in. And the thing is, when I consider that as a foundation of a team, and then we look at the technologies that we're looking at, if a business is using a machine learning algorithm and they're using it to decide, how do they figure out who's going to be, or Disney, I'll give you a great example. Disney use a lot of big data to decide, oh, where is there a queue? Where should I send the entertainment to entertain people in the queue? Which of the restaurants that's in the Disney park today is going to need the most amount of food? So where should I send the supplies? How do I prioritize my logistics in order to make sure that it responds to people? These decisions are machine learning driven, but they're all impacting human beings. They're impacting the staff, they're impacting the people who are visiting the park, they're impacting the business's shareholders. And so designing that ecosystem and making sure that the implications is really, really important. And what I love about service design is that service design and research are BFFs. So in this world where you're not necessarily sure if being a researcher is going to be the longest career trajectory for you, being a service designer definitely should be, and research is a fundamental part of that toolkit. The second kind of design skill that I think is still going to be super relevant is this concept of no UI design. So designing for voice, gesture, augmented and virtual environments. I said earlier on, desktop, web, and mobile don't mean anything because actually technology is pervasive. Everywhere we go, we are hearing things, we are seeing things around us. Most of us listen to things even when we're not using our actual devices, we're listening to audiobooks. And whilst all of this might seem like it's just what it is, I'm just going to record the voice. When you're thinking about interacting with a voice-based UI or a gesture-based UI, it actually links quite closely to like assistive technologies. And when you think about that, you know how intentional you have to be about every single interaction. So in pretty much the same way as we would for an actual UI. What I love about this is that it encourages us to be hacker-like, so to understand the technology, to be, kind of coders, or to be close to the how in order to understand the what, but still bringing our skill set, but still bringing this idea of who are the people who are going to be using this? Who are the people who are going to be affected by this? So these two particular parts of design I'm really excited about, and they're not centering UX, but they're really powerful future-facing design disciplines and areas. Beyond design, so if you're ready to say, I no longer need to have UX in my job title, although I'm sure it's still etched in your heart, here are a couple of things that I think are super important. Product management. If you've worked in an agile or a lean environment, as I have for the last 10 years, you know that the majority of your arguments are with the product management team. Your arguments about, is this the right thing? Have you prioritized it? You're not making room for us. We need to get the investment. We need more resources. These discussions and debates are all arbitrated by the product manager. And their role is to maintain the tension between product engineering and UX. What are all the inputs I need? And then here are the decisions I'm going to make off the back of that. I have found that almost every company that I've worked in, product management is completely different. It's not the same in any two environments. And with that, I've also found that researchers, UX researchers, make amazing product people because they think deeply about a problem, they understand its implications, and they come back and say, this is where I think we're headed. That's that long-term destination. Let's now deconstruct that. So shifting from UX into product is actually a really easy thing to do. You just have to go and acquire the commercial and the engineering conscience that you need to be a great product leader. And finally, this is kind of like an oldie but a goodie, is change management. Because actually every single business, every single employer you're going to have has to reckon with becoming or being a digital business. And again, linking back to what I said about service design, technology businesses are people businesses. And so that intersect of how are the decisions I'm making impacting the people who work here and the things they need to do, That is really, really, really important. And actually, in so many companies, a lot of foreseeable implications, things they could have avoided, are really negative on their workers. So they affect morale, and that in turn affects product, which affects the end user. If you work backwards from that and think about how do I actually preempt some of these shifts and transitions that I need to make, you end up with really effective change management. And there's a particular emergence role, so like product operations or even UX operations. These are change management roles. These are roles that are about building culture, about communication, about practices that keep people in the loop, that build transparency and cohesion in teams. These are really, really important jobs that user-centered practitioners, ex-UX people, should also be stepping into. So with that, I want to leave you with a final thought, which is you could also just become a founder. This is Arlen Hamilton. She is the founder of a venture capitalist fund called Backstage Capital. She became a founder when she had no job, no income, and it was the thing that she felt was most important to do. And so even when she felt least relevant, she was able to become a founder and become even more relevant. So although my message to you today is that UX is dead, I actually think as it relates to UX people, long live UX. Thank you very much. So I can see we've got a couple of minutes and a couple of questions. I'm going to see if I can do a couple of quick answers to these questions, Camilla?
Yeah, of course. We still have 4 minutes left. So
4 minutes. Okay.
go on.
So from Dersia, I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name. What can beginner UX designers do to reconcile what the UX field is looking for now with the future that UX is going to do? What I can say is don't focus on the job title, focus on a set of core practices that follow you, whatever your job title is. So those are going to be about user-centered thinking. Think about who your user is, gain some skills in learning how to do a little bit of research on your own. That's both like conversations as well as desk research or playing with competitor products. Gain some skills in UX strategy. So if I begin here, what happens next? What are the implications? Are those implications good? What are the consequences? Would I be happy with those consequences? So learn to map those skills, whatever your job title, and you can probably always come back to that UX opportunity, but navigate the problems that interest you the most and the industries that interest you the most. And then I will just answer the second question, which is taking into consideration the changes that the UX discipline has been facing. What will always remain the same in UX regardless of time? User-centered thinking. So this idea that human beings have to come first and that you don't get anywhere with any kind of digital product unless you center the human is the thing that will never change. Now, that's not to say that companies won't decenter humans. We see them do it all the time. They focus on profit, they focus on tech, but regulation catches up with them. Society catches up with them. We cancel culture them because we see the negativity that it has when you don't consider human beings as first and foremost humans with dignity, with rights, with equity, and then you design products to suit our needs in that sense. So that's the part of UX that I am passionate about, is being a human-centered practitioner. The rest of it, the specific tools at a point in time, the technology processes, the job titles, that stuff will change because change is the constant in our lives. And if we're ready to roll with those changes, we stand a chance of having greater impact in that next evolution of technology. Hope that is a good answer for you.
Okay. Thank you, Lola. Thank you so much for your time and knowledge. It was a great presentation, and I look forward to applying this on my own career. So
glad to hear.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
for everyone else, we are going to join on the next call. So go on to home and choose the topic you like the most. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Nice talking to you. Bye.